you so much for joining us this morning for One Stop College Admissions. My name is Rebecca Jung, and I'm the Teen Services Librarian here at the Bell Tib Library. I've been here doing teen services for 15 years. I've worked with one of our presenters for most of those years, actually, for a long time. And I serve middle and high school students. Sometimes both middle and high school students might attend programs together or separately. And we've been doing college admissions support for a long time, and I have a lot of sympathy for parents. I'm a parent of a senior in high school myself, and I know how confusing all the information out there can be. There's an overabundance of information and probably some misinformation, and then things change over time as well. I have actually personally and professionally worked with both of our presenters. But my daughter, who's a senior, has gone through the college admissions application process and is now on the other side. And she gained a lot of confidence and support from our presenters. And as a parent, I was very grateful that they took the burden off of me and really helped her through this process and helped us both understand what's going on in all the facets of college admissions and applications. So I want to let everyone know we will be recording. I'm going to hit recordings pause right now. I should have already started it, but I will start as soon as I'm done with my introduction. And the recording and the slides will be available to share afterwards. What we're going to do is start with our first presenter, Michelle Baird from Samara College Advising, who has a great deal of experience working with students, over a decade of experience in this community. And there will be a little Q&A after her session, and then we'll go on to our second presenter, Adam Piacente from Marin SAT Prep, who has worked with hundreds and hundreds of students for about 20 years, specifically on standardized testing. So I'm going to go ahead and hit record, and we will get started.
All right, and I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. So just give me a moment to get my slides up and going. And let me go ahead and hit my slideshow here. All right, and is everyone able to see everything okay? Perfect. So thank you so much, Rebecca, for the introduction. It's great to be here today. My name is Michelle Baird, and I have been college counseling for several years. I got my certificate in college counseling from UCLA Extension and have counseled within the school setting as well as working independently, which is what I do now. I work primarily with students from the Bay Area, although I do work with students from around different regions of the country. And my background is as a former educator. I spent well over a decade in the classroom as a full-time high school history and English teacher. So I'm very focused on growth, very focused on this very unique transition that is happening as students make this huge, very exciting transition from being at home, being in their high school context, and then getting ready to leave home and going to college. So that is all really exciting and rewarding and why I enjoy my work. And so I'm going to start in terms of my presentation. We're going to talk a little bit about what colleges are looking for when they actually sit down and look at a student's application. I'm going to walk through the different pieces of the application process. And also the college counseling process. So you sort of like know when you're going through this college process, what are the major steps? What are the transitions? What is the timeline? What are the things to expect? I know from the outside it can sometimes feel a little bit overwhelming, and I'm here to say you don't have to be overwhelmed. It's actually a very step-by-step process that you can follow. And then I'll take any sort of questions for a couple of minutes right after my presentation before we go into Adam's presentation, who's going to get a little bit more into the nitty-gritty of what testing actually looks like in this day and age. So big thing to keep in mind that when college admissions officers sit down and they read college applications from seniors in the fall or the winter of their senior year, when they sit and look at those applications and are trying to make decisions about whether they're going to admit that student into their class or whether they're not going to admit that student into their class, they're reading those application files holistically. So what this means is that when college admissions officers are really sitting down and looking at your child's application, they're not looking for any one particular thing. They're looking to get a good sense of your child holistically from a lot of different pieces and parts. So there's no one part of that application that is going to get a student into a school, and there's also no one part of that application that is going to prevent a student from being accepted at a school. So I just want to sort of start with the sense that this whole college process is about developing a holistic sense of your student and who they really are and as sort of how they'll present. So when colleges actually sit and look at an application, they're looking at a variety of different things. Which I've listed here, and each college looks at them a little bit differently. They'll rank them in a different order, but these are the things in general that they're looking for. So at the top of the list is obviously student grades and GPA. So colleges are sitting down and really looking at a student's transcript. They have a sense for what those courses are that a student's taken and how they actually did. They also look at students within the context of their high school. So colleges and universities have a very good sense for each of the high schools that students are applying for, what sort of coursework is offered, what opportunities there are for students there. And they're looking to see that students have good, solid grades in their coursework. They're also looking to see that the rigor of the coursework is there. So if your student has an opportunity to take rigorous courses, is your student actually taking those courses and how are they doing in those courses? It is okay, and colleges look that a student is taking more rigorous coursework and may have slightly lower grades in those rigorous courses. That's fine. They want to see that students are really challenging themselves to the best of their ability. One of the other things that schools are looking for is extracurricular activities. So these are all the things that students get up to outside of the classroom. Are they doing performing or visual arts? Are they doing sports? Are they volunteering? Are they working? How is a student spending its time outside of the classroom? A student may spend a significant amount of their time helping at home, whether that's working with older relatives, taking care of younger relatives, driving siblings around. All of those things are important pieces that colleges are looking for. So they're really looking for students to be involved academically. They're looking for students to be involved outside of the classroom as well. One of the biggest pieces that colleges and universities are looking for is a compelling student narrative. So they want to have a good sense of who a student is and sort of what activities, what courses they've taken that sort of make sense in terms of that student's journey and their sort of narrative. So part of the things that colleges are going to look at is personal essays or supplemental essays. They're also going to be looking at teacher recommendations and reading those very closely, counselor recommendations. So there's a lot of different pieces that they're going to look at to really get a sense for who the student actually is. Test scores are also a piece that they're going to be looking at. Not all schools require test scores. Some schools are test optional. However, we are seeing more and more schools moving towards looking at testing. And this is something that Adam will be talking about a little bit more in his presentation. I always have students each year who choose not to test for a variety of different reasons. They may have a learning difference, they may have other reasons why they don't want to test. However, most of my students do test, and those test scores are helpful, particularly in terms of like finding scholarships or financial aid. Sometimes test scores are required for that. It can also be a helpful piece of the puzzle to present to colleges as they're applying. Colleges are also looking for a student's alignment with coursework for their potential major. You don't necessarily need to know what it is that you're going to major in college. You can go in and declare that's fine. But colleges want to see that a student has really thought about, okay, how are they prepared for college coursework? How have they positioned themselves Are they mature enough and ready? And if a student does have a particular area that they want to go into, say they're applying into a business school, or they're very interested in a particular STEM subject, or they're applying to a particular sort of program within a college, they want to see that the student can make a compelling case for what that potential major might actually be, or that they're ready, if they're undeclared, to go into college coursework. And finally, and this is the part that is a little bit hard to predict, is that the student's application needs to fit within the institutional priorities of that college or university. So each college or university is looking for something that's a little bit different, and that can change from year to year, particularly with schools that are highly selective, that have low admissions rates. It is very difficult to predict what they are looking for in a given year. In a given year, they may need a football player who can contribute to their theater program, and that's what they're looking to admit. In another year, that might be someone who plays the oboe and can become a French major at that school. So, the best thing to sort of keep in mind is that students create a compelling narrative of themselves. They really get a sense for who they are. They develop a list of schools, right, where it feels like they're going to be a really good fit. Then they put themselves out there and see. So if a student is not accepted into a school, that has nothing to do with the student's capability. That often has a lot to do with what the institution's priorities were for a given year and whether that student fits in that little box or not. So, part of the college process is really figuring out who the student is, developing a really compelling narrative, and then finding as many colleges and universities as possible where they would potentially be a really good fit, that you can sort of like send out those applications to those schools and see where that synergy actually happens, where the student and the way that they're presenting really matches with what an institution is looking for. All right, so the purpose of the college process to keep in mind, and I tend to be very growth oriented as an educator, is that students really want to develop a sense of themselves and what they want for the future. So as students are going through the college process, they're going to do a lot of exploration. What is possible for me? What opportunities are out there? What could I potentially do that I haven't necessarily thought about, right? And how does my sense of myself fit into that exploration? So students really get a chance to really think about who they are and where they want to be. Students also develop an understanding of the best fit schools for themselves. Just because a school is number one on a particular list does not mean that that is the best school for the student, right? A student needs to go to an institution where the institution is going to recognize and match them and support them, right? So, really getting a sense for where are the best colleges for me, for the things that I'm looking for, the type of students that I want to be with, the professors who teach the way that I want them to teach, and the sorts of things that I want to study. So, really developing that sense of where's the best place for me. Students also develop the skills, tools, and resources that they need to be successful in college and beyond. There's a lot of soft skill development that happens throughout the college process, whether that's deepening research skills, like learning how to articulate yourself a little bit better in writing, really sort of digging into who you are. A lot of what I do with students is simply like, how do you write an email to an adult, particularly like an admissions officer at a college that you would like to go to? Like, there's some pieces of this that students really learn to develop agency, sense of self, sense of voice, communication skills that are really important. All right, so if we're breaking the college process down into its basic components, it follows or tracks in this particular way. So the first part is academic and activity development, and this tends to happen through the first part of high school. So really thinking about what are the academic courses that students are taking, planning so that students are taking rigorous courses in areas that are really of interest to them. If the student's particularly interested in STEM, maybe thinking about focusing a bit more on STEM courses. If a student really loves humanities, really thinking about going in that direction. Overall, academically, what colleges are looking for is balance. So they want to see that students are taking a lot of different courses in a lot of different areas and that they are actually sort of following and sort of matching all those pieces of the core curriculum, and that they are also within that, while doing that, that they are developing specific interests and aptitudes in particular coursework. Another piece is really activity development. And so this is all the stuff that students do outside of the classroom. So maybe this is athletics, maybe this is interning, maybe this is getting a job. This can be a variety of different things, joining a club, leading a club, and really trying out a lot of different things. When I'm working with students, one of the things that I tell them is that it's really important to try a lot of things and find out what it is that you don't like. Because learning what you don't like can be as important as figuring out what it is that you do like, right? That it's very important to try something and say, whoa, that is not for me. That can help really guide your process as it happens. So, this academic and activity development is also a lot about trying things on to see sort of what sticks. And also trying some things that are a little bit out of your comfort zone to see if that opens up some possibilities for you that you hadn't necessarily thought about before. The second part is the college research and application list building. So this is when you actually like sit down and start figuring out, okay, I've heard about this school. What actually is going on at that school? Are the topics offered that I want to study actually at that school? And actually sort of learning about, okay, if I were to put myself on this campus, what would it look like? What would my experience be? And is that something that I'm interested in doing? Um, Part of this can happen in the junior year. Also know that like I have seniors who will show up in September and be like, okay, I'm ready to start, right? And so it is okay to start the process a little bit later when you're ready to actually be like, okay, I want to explore schools. I want to figure out what's right for me. I want to figure out what's not right for me. And then develop an application list. So really thinking about applying to a variety of different schools that are all a good match for the student that have different admissions rates, right? So when you're actually thinking about a list of schools to apply to, you want to think about some schools that are going to be a reach for the student, that they have a lower chance of actually getting accepted to. You want a lot of schools where the student is going to be a really good match, like 50-50 chance of admission, where they're a really good match. And you also want several schools, right? 3, 4, where the student has a very likely chance of admission, right? So where a student of this of yours, like your child would definitely be admitted. You want to run through that process so at the end you have choices. It's not just like I've thrown all my birds I've sort of like put all of my eggs. Oh man, I am mangling my metaphors. That's okay though. I put all my eggs in baskets where it's really hard to get into, right? And seeing what happens. You want to make sure that you've got eggs in a lot of different baskets of a lot of different possibilities. So at the end, you can sit down and make the choice that's best for you. You get into the personal essay and application writing development, usually starting summer of the junior year, but honestly, a lot of seniors go through a lot of growth and development in the fall of their senior year as well. And as they go through the writing process of actually writing the personal essay that they're going to send to colleges or working on different pieces of application writing, sometimes it takes, September, October, early November of the senior year to really flesh out that personal sense of voice and purpose. So that can be a long process, but it's definitely an important process. It is something that you want to start early. You don't want to wait until like the night before an application to actually start that writing process, but it is something that evolves over time. And then the last piece is application submission and offer review. And these are two pieces, right? So often those applications will actually go in the fall and the winter of senior year and sort of following a very basic timeline and knowing, okay, in order to get these applications done by these particular deadlines, I'm going to take it piece by piece. It is very possible to take it piece by piece and not be overwhelmed by the application process. There's a little bit of a lull, usually, after those applications go in. And this is a really important time for seniors to refocus on, okay, I'm going to refocus on my classes, my friends, my activities, my sleep, all the things that I'm going to catch up with, right, while I was going through the actual application process. And then those offers of admission come in, and you want an opportunity to actually sit and think and review those offers of admission. Really critically, this is a point at which students could potentially go back and visit schools if they're like, okay, I was admitted to these 2 or 3 schools and I'm not sure which one of these I actually want to go to. Sometimes going back at that point and actually visiting campus can really help a student determine what that choice actually is. All right, so the next slide that I've got is a little bit more of a nitty-gritty timeline where I've sort of broken down each year what it is that you're doing. So I'm going to sort of walk you through this. I know it's a little bit of a lot of information. But ninth and 10th grade year is really about academic advising. So, really thinking about academics and developing good study skills, making sure that you're doing well in your classes, you're adjusted well to high school. There's a transition to the freshman year that takes a while to sort of sort out and get comfortable. And there's also a transition that happens in fall of sophomore year as well. Coursework changes, teachers' expectations get a little bit more serious, right? Students are expected to perform at a higher level. So, making sure that students are making those transitions and developing their academic skills and allowing the time that they need to really grow as an academic, as a student in the classroom is really important. Activity development is also really important in that ninth and 10th grade year. Go join a club that you're interested in. Try volunteering somewhere. Maybe think about developing a dog walking business. If you're involved in athletics, really sort of sinking into that. If you're really into visual arts, really starting to work on your skills in particular different areas. So just sort of like deepening that experience with those particular activities. And then the biggest thing, and I put a little exclamation point here, is exploring new things and experiences. Just because you think that you want to go to law school or medical school, or you want to go get an MBA in business or whatever it may happen to be, don't just like put yourself in a little box, right? Explore new things, try new things. This is the point where failure is important, or finding out things that you don't like, so you know that you can look in other areas. 11th grade year is definitely a year where the academics step up. I think everybody's sort of aware of this. This is also the year that primarily when colleges look at transcripts of students, they are looking at the junior year, particularly if students are applying early, so like early in the fall to schools in their senior year. The transcript that the college admissions officers will actually have and be looking at is the junior transcript. So prioritizing academics during this year is particularly important. This is also the time when college representatives come from all over the country and visit local high schools. And if you have a senior who has, or if you have a junior who did not go to any college rep visits this year, don't worry, all the reps come back senior year as well. So they are there for you. But this is a time to really go and sit in as all these college reps, like land in your high school and give 20-minute presentations about their particular college or university, and then ask an opportunity to ask questions. You can expose yourself really quickly to a lot of different schools. You can make connections with college reps. You can email follow up and like start to build a relationship with them. And this is a really good opportunity to go to a school's presentation that you've never heard of before, or a school that you've heard of but don't know anything about. This is a great free way to learn a lot about a lot of different schools quickly. This is also a good time to start virtual or in-person campus tours. You do not have to fly all over the United States to visit a whole bunch of different campuses. There are virtual tours for campuses. If you just Google the name of a campus and virtual tour, you can get on, you can find a video, you can get on. Oftentimes there's very cool 3D little tours that you can take around campus and learn more about them. If you do visit in person, you can go and sign up for tours. It's also totally fine to visit schools that are local to find out a little bit more about what a school is like or what a size of a campus is like. So if you're interested in a really big campus and what that feels like, go visit UC Davis and see how that feels to you. You may not actually want to go to UC Davis, but being on campus, going on a tour, walking around, checking out the students will give you a sense for what a really big school actually looks like. If you're interested in a smaller school, you could go to Dominican University, right? Walk around, take a tour. That doesn't necessarily mean that you want to go to these schools, although you may, and they're both great schools that are good for a lot of different things. But that can give you a sense for, oh, that's too small, that's too big. I like a school more near an urban environment. I need something rural, right? So that's a really good, easy way to start feeling that out. This is when college test list building starts happening. So starting to research those schools and learning more about them. And then also test preparation. I'll let Adam talk a little bit more about that, but that definitely factors in at this time period. Summer after 11th grade is when the personal essay is generally written. I usually counsel students to have a good rough draft of their personal essay by the time they go into their senior year. However, for some students, that happens in the fall of their senior year when they're really ready, and that is totally fine. September and October for seniors really looks like starting to get applications together, starting to write supplemental essays, starting to get the pieces of everything that they need together, and sort of continuing that test prep if a student is testing. A note for parents, if you're interested in financial aid, the CSS profile and the FAFSA open in early October. And so the CSS profile is financial information, usually based on tax returns, that's used by private universities and colleges to figure financial aid packages. So they are going to ask you to file that CSS profile so they can figure financial aid for you. That opens in October. And then FAFSA is federal financial aid for students. That usually opens October 1st. So any final award of financial aid will happen through FAFSA. So you want to make sure that you're filing that as well. And if a student is applying early, right, so that means they apply early to a school so they can hear some earlier news back. Early applications are generally due November 1st through November 15th. So it's just sort of good to keep planning in your mind that like September and October has a lot to do with getting those early applications ready. I generally suggest that students don't apply early to all of the schools on their list that they're going to apply to. That can be a lot of work all at once. But one of the things that I do say is, hey, maybe pick 4 or 5 schools that you like that offer you the opportunity to apply early to so you can get some early news back from them so you can start to plan the rest of your applications. So you're aware the University of California and California State University applications are usually due right at the end of November, the very beginning of December. That date moves around a little bit depending on the year. Sometimes it's November 30th, sometimes it's December 1st. But once students sort of get through their early applications, they will then apply to the UCs and the CSUs. And then everyone goes home, has a good winter break, sort of recalibrates everything it is that they're doing. And then regular decision applications are due January 1st through January 15th. So this is sort of the last big sort of push in terms of the applications. And results come back from those schools, depending on the school. It all kind of comes back at different times. By April, your student will have heard back from all of their colleges and universities they applied to and will have a decision from each one of them. And also, all financial aid offers will be in April, so you can look at them and compare them. And then the deadline for enrollment in terms of doing enrollment decisions. So you have to choose one school that you're going to actually enroll at, and then you'll have to pay a matriculation deposit to that one particular school. That's due May 1st. So students have a long time to actually make these decisions and run through this process. Um, and so one of the important things to keep in mind as we run through all of this is that college process can feel a little bit overwhelming, but it's important to know that there is no one school that is right for every single student. Each student has multiple colleges where they will thrive. And a lot of the college process is about figuring out where that actually is, where those schools are, where your child has a good chance to actually thrive. And that high school students successfully navigate the college process each year. It definitely happens, right? It is a rite of passage, and people navigate it successfully each year. And that this is about growth. It's really an opportunity for students to learn more about who they are, to develop a sense for themselves in the world and who they want to be in that world, and to participate in creating their own future. And I'm going to, excuse me, I'm going to share my email here and I'll share it again at the end. And I'm going to escape really quickly and ask if anyone has questions that they would like to ask.
Hi, Michelle. I do have a couple of questions. It's just mostly logistics since we're just starting this process. Um, you said we don't start visiting schools until junior year. May, do we maybe go do some more local tours before then? There's so many schools out there. I just don't even know how to offer this list of schools, a wide variety of schools for them because I think of a few schools in the area that are, terrific schools, but there's so many. So how do we find out about them, I guess?
Absolutely, that's a great question. Um, and you can sort of do a lot of different things. I have some students who don't do a ton of traveling because it's expensive, right?
Sure.
And I also have students who do a lot of traveling to see a lot of different schools. It just sort of depends on your family and your particular situation. One of the good things to do is that when you are traveling or you have an adult in your family who's traveling, um, and you're going to a particular location, take your child with you and take them to a local campus nearby where you're going, right? So if you're going to Boston for a family wedding, make sure that you schedule a couple of tours. Or if you happen to be going to San Diego for work, see if you can bring your student along and visit a couple of campuses. So you can actually sort of spread it out over a couple of years so it doesn't feel like you have to go see a whole bunch of schools all at once. Um, some students will take spring break of junior year and they will travel and they will see a whole bunch of campuses. I would suggest not seeing more than two campuses a day, though, because they start to run together for students. They don't have a real good recall of much other than the weather at
Right.
that point. It's also important that as you're traveling to make sure that you're taking your student to a wide variety of different schools. So let's say that you're going to Boston, make sure that you're going to some schools that have low admissions rates where it would be challenging for the student to actually get accepted there. Make sure that you're going to schools that also have different acceptance rates that are more generous, right? And particularly some of those schools that have very generous acceptance rates. You want your child or your student to get a sense for what all of these things actually are. I know that some parents will take their student to see a lot of schools, and every single one of them has an admissions rate under 10%, which is really challenging because then the students come to me and they're like, oh, how in the world am I going to do this? And it's like, we don't just want those students to apply to highly, highly selective schools. We want a range. So
Along those, oh,
go
let,
ahead.
sorry to interrupt you. So along those same lines, we don't always know of all those different schools, and so we can go online and look a little bit at different schools, but it seems like the glossy brochure. You don't really know what you're getting, and so maybe you can recommend a book that would be a little bit more non-biased, that would like compare them in similar areas, because I think a lot of schools when I look are highlighting their great things, but I'm not even asking the other questions when I'm looking at a school I've never heard of. And
Right.
maybe a book would offer some, comparisons that are, on the same line. So
Yeah. Okay.
a little
So
more
I'm
non-biased.
all right. I'm gonna take off my earphones and go to
Sorry.
my bookshelf and
Oh,
bring a
geez.
couple of books back. So fear not. Hold on.
Okay. Thanks.
And I'll just chime in while Michelle's doing that,
Oh,
just to
yeah.
say a lot of these books are available in the library system. I mean, a lot of different
Yes.
college guides. I can't personally recommend one over another, but if you were to go online to our catalog and browse or come in and browse, there are a lot of college guides that are timely. They come out every year, they're annuals, and they compare all the colleges. And also, once your student is probably once they're a junior, the colleges know you're out there. You will start getting postcards from every college in the
Oh, really?
universe.
Okay.
Yeah, it's true.
Well,
Actually, yeah, Rebecca, you're totally like the person to answer this
right.
question because Rebecca has all the resources, right? In terms of a place to start, this is a big kind of intimidating book, but it has a lot of information. This
Okay.
guide to colleges, I'm going to hold it up for you here. This is an old version. I need to get myself an updated version, but this
Okay.
is what was close. This is going to break down a lot of different schools. It'll do it by region, which is really helpful. So you can just sort of go and look and see what's there. It also will give you admissions rates, and it gives you usually like a two-page overview of each school. So you can sort of peruse it pretty quickly and figure out what's going on and what schools are in the particular area. Another one that's really good that I use is the College Finder. Choose a school that's right for you. And what this does, particularly if you know that you have a student who's interested in studying something in particular, or, I'm just sort of opening up, like here it is, colleges that have many kosher meal plan options, Lutheran colleges and universities. Like if there's a particular thing that you're interested in looking for, colleges with excellent career counseling, it will give you lists. So if you know that there's something that your student is particularly interested in, it'll break down the best schools in that area. So there's so many resources, but those are two good places to start.
That's great. That was exactly what I was looking for.
Okay, good.
And then I had another question. I've heard people talk about early admissions and early decision and all that stuff. And then you said that the UC and CSU apps are due in November. Is that an early admission or is that just a regular admission?
That's just a regular admission. So I'm going to break down just a couple of little pieces of terminology. You can get like super jargony really quickly when you get into college admissions, as I'm sure you're aware because you hear particularly like parents of seniors start saying lots of things. So early decision a student would apply early decision, and that decision is binding. So a student, if they wanted to, would choose exactly one school that they would apply to early decision. And if they are accepted at that school, that is binding, which means that they're going to go. And some students will do early decision if they can actually decide on one place where they're really sure that they would be really happy. A lot of students don't do early decision because they may need more financial aid options. They may need to look at a lot of offers from a lot of different schools. I also have a number of seniors who just aren't ready by November 1st to commit to exactly one place. Like they need more time and they have more good options, right? So they may not do early decision. Early action is applying early, usually in that November 1st to November 15th window. You receive early news back, but that is not binding, right? So it
Mm-hmm.
usually makes sense to apply to a couple of schools that your child really likes early and then wait to hear what that news is. But you have until May 1st to make that decision. It can just be helpful to have some news early in the process so you know how to actually do your sort of regular decision. And then UCs and CSUs have a separate application just for them. And they are just one application cycle. So technically they're regular, right? A regular decision application. And they have a hard deadline at the end of November or December.
Okay, so two questions about that. So I understand the binding of early decision in one school, and the benefits are you kind of increase your chances of getting in a little bit because you're kind of interested, especially interested. But the downside is that you don't get any financial aid, right?
Well, you can get financial aid. It depends on the school. So the thing is that whatever financial aid you get from that institution, you have to go with, right? So you can go back to the institution and say, hey, you can always negotiate and talk with financial aid officers to try and make something work. But by and large, you are binding yourself into that acceptance and what that initial financial aid offer is. So it's something you want to be careful about, particularly if you're looking for financial aid.
And then early action, you said maybe you aim for a couple, 4 or 5 schools that they're really interested in. And does that help their chances of getting in because it shows extra interest or not particularly?
It depends on the school. A lot of things about college counseling
Right.
are it depends on the school. But yes, a lot of schools are moving to accept really depends on the school. Some schools accept a good chunk or percentage of their applicants' early decision or
Oh,
early action. It just sort of depends. They like to sort of get early news back because they know the students are really interested in their school.
okay.
So those acceptances, they're more likely to yield. This student is actually more able to come or more likely to come. So part of the game is it's colleges are trying to accept students that they have a feeling are going to actually come to that school. So yes, applying early can increase a student's chances of actually getting in, but it really depends on the school. That's why it's good to go through the early process, get some early news, and then plan to have a regular process as
Right.
well with regular decision.
And then the last question, and I'll let everybody else ask questions.
Okay.
The UC and CSU, we talked about its regular mission, but it's early. Do you hear early from them, or do you not hear early from them?
It takes them as long as it takes them to get back to you. Every
Oh,
campus is a little bit different, just so you know. And some will release faster than others. The UCs go through a lot of applications, and they go through a lot of applications as quickly as they can, but it just simply takes them some time. Yeah,
well, thank you. It was great information. I appreciate it. Thank you.
great.
Let's go ahead and move on to the second part of our presentation, and then we will have some time at the end for follow-up questions. So I'd like to introduce again Adam Piacente from Marin SAT Prep.
My name's Adam Piacente. I've been teaching SAT and ACT prep in Marin for over 20 years now. Let me get up that slide. I'm a retired attorney and law school professor. I actually wrote the official guide to the Lexis.com research service. If any lawyers are in the audience, they know what I'm talking about. Way back when they first had the rollout. But since 2006, I've been working instead of law students, I've been working with high school students. And Marin SAT Prep, the company, we've helped thousands of students. I've helped nearly 1,000. I went back and looked at my numbers. I'm getting close to 1,000 over the last 20 years, helping students improve their scores. I don't do any college advising or anything like that. My job is just to get your numbers up, and that's what I focus on. But in the interim, in terms of, I do basically private tutoring and some group tutoring for the SAT and ACT. Also, over the years, I've worked with a number of local high schools, nonprofits, doing college nights, things like that. With Belvedere Tiburon Library, we've been doing this program for about 15 years now. Rebecca and I have been doing that. Rebecca, I just want to say thank you for hosting this. Um, for those of you who don't know Rebecca, she is, and I always say it, she's the hardest working youth librarian in Marin. So thanks very much. So let's get into this. Okay, first of all, admission tests, how important are the tests? Admission tests are required or optional over 95% of four-year nonprofit colleges. We'll get into difference between required and optional in a second. 83% of college test scores say the test scores are of considerable or moderate importance. So they are something the schools want to see. It really helps them determine college readiness, whether your student is academically qualified to succeed at the university. And that's really what they're looking for. And in fact, what they're really looking for is whether or not you're going to succeed through first year. That's the real purpose of these tests, because they don't want dropouts, and students who are able to get through the first year statistically are most likely to graduate. It's that first year where they tend to wash out. So if students are not, if they think the student's going to get through first year, then they can handle the rest of the work. So that's the purpose of the testing is really if it boils down to, can you convince the admissions officers that you can handle the work for that first year? Okay. Michelle did a little of this. I'd like to do a little more on this, on the factors of college admissions. There's an old sort of, the old chestnut for this is the three legs of the stool. Grades is one, test scores and other extracurriculars. This is a survey, the NACAC survey of all college admissions. And as you can see, admission test scores, about 83% consider them of considerable and moderate importance in college admissions. So they do want to see them, and we're going to see how much they actually do affect the decision making in a sec. But in general, if you are, let's say, not every student has a great ride through 4 years of high school for a lot of different reasons, and most things out of their control, like health issues or emotional issues or family issues or just anything that goes on. And a lot of times, you don't get a students who are just 4.0 all the way through or have to learn skills and whatever. So if your student hasn't been the greatest student for 4 years, there's no question that studying for the tests and improving your score on the test is the easiest and most effective way to improve your chances for admission. Because, you can, by junior year, you've already got 2 years under your belt. You can really work hard and get all A's for one semester, but that's still only an eighth of your score. Whereas if you work you prep and you do and you improve, let's say, a couple of 100 points on your SAT, you can improve you're improving your percentiles. And we're going to see more on how this all works by like 20, 25%, in terms of admissions. And that can really make a huge difference in the number of schools that are willing to look at you seriously for admissions. So it really is the easiest and most effective way to really boost your profile in terms of the schools you're looking at. Also, in addition, Michelle talked about this previously, SAT scores are used for college admissions, and typically the breakdown is if you're in the top 25% of your incoming freshman class in terms of what your scores were, that's typically the cutoff for most schools for academic scholarship. So if you want to get money back, what I like to say is sometimes their students are like, I want to get the score because I want to get the best score I possibly can because they get in the best school. Sometimes, you may have a good score. It may not be the best score for this top flight school you're looking for, but if, say, a school that's slightly lower where you actually are in the top 25, all of a sudden you can start thinking about getting money back. So there's some things in terms of your SAT that really open up opportunities, not just in terms of your missions, but also in terms of how much it's going to cost you. Okay, so everybody asks about required versus optional. Let's just talk about what they are first, and then we'll talk about sort of how it works sort of in the real world. Test required schools, all students must submit your ACT scores when applying. They need to see them in order for this application to be complete. It's not like the old days, though. I get a lot of parents who are like, well, did they do ACT or SAT? It doesn't matter anymore. Every school takes either the ACT or SAT. There's no difference. It used to be where one would take one or the other. Now it will accept either one. For test optional, students may submit SAT scores when applying for admission. Long story short, you should, if you're test optional, in my opinion, as an SAT tutor, you should submit your scores if you're in the range. We're going to see about that in a minute. But two things that happened, a little background, things that happened when schools started implementing test optional during COVID was that it increased the school's average test scores, because what they basically did was they cut out the bottom third of the regular pool and made that test optional. So they didn't automatically just look at your scores if you were in the bottom third of the SAT pool to let you in if they thought you were in the range. So it increased the average test scores, and we'll see this in a minute. It also increased the number of applications, which decreases the acceptance rate. So there was one school I think it was an Ivy League school that once they put in test optional, they made an extra $6 million in just application fees alone because they got so many applications. Oh, this great school isn't asking for test scores anymore, so let's go submit. So they got a lot of extra applications in there, and it really decreased the acceptance rate. I'm just giving that kind of background on how it affects it to see exactly, to make my point about why you should submit scores. So let's just take an example here. Okay, so this is not any particular score. This is just an example of different schools, an example of a random school. So before test optional, let's say this was your range, about 1,300 to should be 1,450 on that. And you've got the bottom 50, top 50. After test optional, you can see how they've gotten rid of that bottom third. They just put all of that pool of students within that bottom third into sort of the no score pool. And so students who submit tend to be, the scores tend to go up because they've kind of cut those out. They've given more students in the bottom range a chance, or without scores a chance. But here's the deal, and Michelle and I have talked about this, and I don't think she doesn't qualify in this group, but there are a lot of college counselors you may hear from who will tell you that you should only submit scores if you're in the top, whoops, sorry, let's go back. If you're in the top 50%. In my opinion, that is not a valid argument, not a valid strategy. Here's why. First of all, let's say you are at a 1,400. And in this situation, that puts you after test optional in the lower 50%. Well, if you, before test optional, now here's the deal. The group up here is no different than the group they let in here. It's just that they've cut out the bottom number of scores so that all of a sudden their scores go up. So it's the same number of students at the end of the day. If there's no more, they're not getting more 1,500 students than they used to. But down here, you would have been kind of solidly in the score range for that. But if you don't tell them you're in, say, this area here, if you don't tell them you've got a 1,400, well, they're going to assume you're somewhere in here. So whereas a 1,400 at that school is clear evidence that you are, like I said, before test option, 1,400 right here, you're you're basically right in the middle of the scores for a given school. They know you can do the work. They know you're going to get through first. You're okay based on those scores. However, if you don't tell them that, then they're just going to assume you're not. And you're really hurting your application. And real quick story, I had one student I worked for a long time. The student had specific learning issues, and we worked pretty hard with him. It was an ACT score, and he went from a 26 to a 32 composite. And his mom talked to a college counselor, and she said, well, you shouldn't, because the schools are looking at it was an Ivy League school at the time. You shouldn't submit it. And I kind of went back and forth where they're kind of telling her that, really trying to convince her that she should submit the scores, because it was in the range. It just wasn't at the top of the range. And she ended up submitting the scores, and the student ended up getting into Cornell. And she thanked me for that, because it really, I want to point that out, because test optional is not what it thinks. It's not like, oh, we don't care about your scores. That's not what they're saying. What they're saying is they're trying to give students who may not have great test scores for whatever reason. They come from a school, they're from a lower income, and they can't afford test prep or whatever it is. They're trying to give those students a chance, and there's nothing wrong with that. But that doesn't mean that if you are in the range, if you do have your scores, that you shouldn't be submitting these scores, because it really is not a good strategy just to say, okay, if I don't get a great, fantastic score, I shouldn't submit, because you are in the range and it will help. I argue that even if you're down here somewhere, and you're making a reach, maybe to get into that school, that you still want to submit it, because you knew even if you're at the low level, you still know you're the top of the level of students who don't submit scores, and you still got a chance. That's my own opinion. Like I said, I'm an SAT tutor, so there is a thing. But even if I wasn't there, I would still say the same thing. It just makes sense in terms of that. Okay, so let me get off that, but that's just my little spiel on test optional. Okay. In support of that, Kaplan did a college admissions officers survey in 2020. 67% said the score helps. And the numbers actually show that, prove that out. Here's an example, and this was from the first year they put in test optional, of students who actually were admitted to college without scores versus admitted to college with scores. And if you look at the admissions rate for all of these schools, we'll go down to the end here and look at Boston College, for instance. Students who didn't submit students who did submit scores were 2.7 times more likely to get into that school than students that didn't. And if you look across all of these, it's basically, a lot of them are just basically, if you average it out, it's about 2 to 1. So you're far more likely to get in if you've got some scores which are at least in the range for those schools. Because they are still looking for students, and that's even more so now. There's a real push, actually. The test optional is sort of, the wave of it has peaked, and now there are a lot of schools that are reinstituting the SAT as a requirement, because they're getting too many applications that they just can't tell without the scores whether these students are actually meeting their requirements. And so many of the most selective schools have reinstituted the SAT and ACT as required. I think more are coming, but in general, the whole idea of this test optional is fading, and schools are realizing that, hey, we still really do need the tests, which is why they implemented in the first place back in the 60s to do that. Now, with that said, the caveat, as many of you know, UCs and CSUs do not require the SAT, but there's a sort of, I'm getting students now and parents asking me, well, I hear a rumor they're reinstituting it, and it's coming back and everything. I can't tell you that that's going to happen. I do know that, for instance, UCSD came up with just put out a long report on how no test admissions has been working for them. And it's basically a big white flag saying, hey, can we please put the test back, for a number of reasons I don't need to get into right now. But there is pressure to bring them back. Whether or not by the time your student is applying to these schools, that's going to happen, I have no idea. But it is, I do believe eventually it's coming back. But in general, when, we don't know. Okay, so my recommendation is definitely take the test. Expand your college choices. It improves your admission chances, we talked about, and increases scholarship opportunities. For all these reasons, it's really important to take these tests. Okay, so let's compare different SAT and ACT when you're determining which one you want to take. Basically, the plain distinction between the two of them is that the ACT is much more of a sprint. The SAT is an obstacle course. The SAT, when I say obstacle course, is much more, there's more of an IQ component, and a few more tricks, a few more different strategies you need to know for the SAT. The questions are written not as plainly. They want students to be able to think about the question. There's a few more, they throw more curveballs at you. Once you have the strategies in place, once you know what you're looking for, getting through the obstacles is fairly easy. But if you don't know what those obstacles are, where you're going from, it's very easy to get tripped up. ACT is questions are much more straightforward. However, there's more, especially on the math side, there's more content that you need to know, but there's also more questions in the same amount of, in the same amount of time. So you really need to move very quickly. So it's much more of a sprint. It's more like teaching someone how to run more quickly rather than how to jump over the obstacles, which is the SAT. So if your student is someone who likes to move quickly through tests, tends to finish early, a lot of times the ACT is a better test for them. If your student is more methodical, likes to take their time, doesn't mind sort of the puzzles and the trick side, oftentimes the SAT is a better test for them. ACT will come in a digital format or a paper format, so you can do it online or take the paper. Personally, I prefer my students, if they've got the choice here on the ACT, to do the paper. It's especially valuable on the performance subjects of reading and science, especially in the reading, because the passages are long and it takes students a while to get through them. So being able to mark that up on paper is a lot easier for them than having to do it on a screen. Digital SAT is a digital format for all of it, so you don't really have a choice. The SAT, well, let's go back to the ACT for a minute. Science is optional. I recommend taking the science if you're going to do it. The schools, and Michelle, maybe you can speak to this a little bit, but schools tend to be really focused on STEM subjects, science, technology, engineering, math, which is the math and science portions of the test. We're going to see the subjects in a minute. I'll show you. But they really want to see that STEM. So if you've got a chance on the science, take it. You don't have to know any science. It's just a matter of how well you can read charts and graphs. And pretty much students, even if they don't really have a big science background, can do pretty well on that once they use the format of the questions. The essay, they still offer this college. This is not the application essay. This is an essay you write while you're taking the test. This was installed back in 2015. The colleges said they wanted to see a raw writing sample in case they suspected you didn't write your college application. It was really kind of a failed experiment. The SAT, when it came out with its new digital format, got rid of the essay entirely. ACT still hangs on to it, but none of the schools really want to see it. So it's not necessary you do the essay. But I would recommend that you do the science optional on that, the science test on that. For that. Okay, so finally on the SAT side, the difference between ACT and SAT is that SAT also has an adaptive module. And what that means is they'll give you the first module, which is basically a general overview of say the verbal section, where they'll give you a bunch of different questions that are easy, medium, and hard. Depending on how you do on that first module, they're going to give you a second module that's either the easier module or the harder module. And if you get the easier module on the second one, the most scores you can get is a 600 out of 800 on either one of the subjects. Again, we're going to talk about scores in a sec. If you get the harder module, then oftentimes the lowest you can get is sort of the high 500s into the 6. And it's a matter of, when you get the harder modules, which we try and get all our students into the harder module, because that kind of guarantees you a baseline number. Then it's a matter of ratcheting up to get to go as high as you can. Okay, so let's talk about the nitty-gritty of the test. Is ACT is 4 subjects: English, math, reading, and science being optional. Each subject is 0 to 36 points. Top score is 36 for any subject. And what they call the ACT composite score is an average of all those scores. So they just average the 4 subjects. Whatever you get, whatever that average is your final composite score. They round up. So if you're at 31.5, they'll call it a 32. On the SAT, it's 2 subjects, 200 to 800 points apiece. Basically, they don't like you saying this, but it's 200 points just to write your name. And then the top score is 800. They add the verbal and scores together. Each one's total for a total score sum of 1600 is your best score you can get. Okay, so how do you decide which test you're going to take? Now, if I've got a student who's got time and wants to do this, I will like them to take both the ACT and SAT official practice tests, so we can see which one which one they have better tendencies are. A lot of students will come in pretty much at the same rate. And the way you tell that rate is by what they call these concordance tables. These are official tables that are put out by the College Board and ACT in conjunction, which kind of give you a range. So for instance, looking at on the left there, if you're ACT 30, that's a range of about 1370 on your SAT. And these are this is how you can tell how well you're doing. Most students who take a practice test, both practice tests, tend to do fairly evenly, but I do, and especially this is true lately, seeing a much bigger gap between certain scores. Some students will do better on the SAT, some students do better on the ACT. And whereas before that wasn't as much of a case, now you are seeing gaps where these tests definitely have, students definitely have tendencies towards one or the other. So it's a really good idea to take both tests to determine which one you've got the better potential at. Okay, so we're going to get into the calendar for this in a minute, but I want to emphasize to everybody right now that it really is important that you take either test at least twice. A lot of parents, a lot of students, they get prepared for that first test, and I just want to take it, and I just want to get these numbers out of the way, and let me just get my numbers and I'm done. I will tell you right now that for the most part, students who take their first test almost very rarely use their first test scores as their final numbers, because it's like jumping in the pool. The first time you jump in a pool, you can have lessons on the side of the pool tell you how to swim, but until you jump in the pool in that live test environment with all the students around and you're nervous and you're trying to process all the different strategies and rules, you're just not going to put it all together as well as you do the second time. And even the third time. So basically what I like is for students to take the test twice during junior year to really sort of optimize their numbers going into the summer. And then you go look at schools, you see, what your options are, where you think you can get in. And then you might talk to a college counselor and they'll say, well, yeah, we like you, but if you can get your math score up by about 50 points, I think we got a good shot at getting in. So then senior year, you take it the last time to really polish up your numbers. And seniors almost always do their best, especially boys, and especially on the verbal side. So but in general, if you've got students that lag on the verbal side, that senior year, you really see the numbers pop on the verbal side. Also on the math as well. My best numbers I get are always for seniors doing that fall test, but especially on the verbal side, if you feel like your verbal number is not where you want it to be, often senior year is the time that they really, for some reason, they just really improve on that. Okay, let's talk about a calendar here. So the stars are sort of my ideal. If I've got a student, this is what I'd like them to do in terms of the calendar. That early December test for juniors, I like them to get in a test, and I like them to take the test at least once in December or in first semester, usually December, because I've had a chance to work with them. We're just getting the points on the board. We understand probably these are scores we're not going to be using, but we're getting a live test environment, the experience of that, so that when you take it again in either February for the ACT or March for the SAT, you feel like you're an old pro. You feel like you're coming in, you've got some numbers, you're working to improve, and it's that second time when you really see those numbers pop. And it's a really good calendar because the later you get into that semester, the second semester, especially because you're hitting those, especially for the SAT, that May test hits right before the week before the AP exams. And students are just, at that point, they're just kind of walking zombies. They're just trying to get through. Junior is the toughest. Second semester is very difficult. And they really, performance tends to lag. They're just tired. And a lot of these tests are performance based in a lot of ways. So they just don't tend to perform as well on those late tests. So I like to get, like, if I've got my juniors, I'll get them first time into December, get that first test out of the way. And then they're really looking to get some nice numbers on the board February and March, and then come back. Because the other thing about getting a couple of scores in is because you've got a nice portfolio going into when you're talking to schools in the summer. And a lot of times, you're doing these college visits, it's also, you're selling yourself to them, right? And if you have numbers already booked, if you have official numbers that are not just, I took a practice test and I got this and I think I can do this, but if you've got actual numbers, official numbers that you can say, here's my score report, they're going to look at you a lot more seriously than they are some student that thinks they can get those numbers. And so it really does help sell you to them. And then again, that mid-September, early October tests for the ACT and SAT are by far the best performing tests of the year. Those are when I get my best numbers for seniors taking those tests. I will give you a caution on that late August SAT. A lot of parents like to get, and students like to get, just, well, let's do something over the summer and then have them take that late August SAT so they can get everything out of the way before they start the senior year. It's a good strategy, but it doesn't work, because what happens is that late August test, students are still in summer mode. Their clocks aren't back on that regular academic schedule, and there's that brain fog and they just don't perform as well. That August test is just not a good performing test. Whereas once they're back in the academic environment, once they've got their clocks back on schedule, they take that early October, they're focused for applications, obviously, they're focused for their numbers, and they really do a very nice job on that early October test. So while you'd like it to get it out of the way in August, chances are, if you really want to maximize your numbers, early October for that SAT is the way to go. That mid-September for the ACT, that's the one you want to take. Okay, so when to start prepping? Earliest, summer before junior year. I get a lot of people, and anytime before summer going to junior year, they just really haven't had, especially on the math side, but also their reading skills just aren't developed enough. So summer going into junior year, I mean, I do have some sophomores that come in for special reasons, but for the most part, summer going to junior year, for struggling students, busy students, or just you feel like you just want to get started, and that's fine. Also, it's for National Merit Scholar is the PSAT for junior year also links up with National Merit Scholar qualifying test, NSMSQT. And basically the PSAT is a practice SAT. It doesn't count towards your college admissions, but it's just a practice test that the schools, it's official practice that this basically run through the high schools, that determines National Merit Scholar. National Merit Scholar is basically, you get some money back if you become a National Merit Scholar. I think it's like $2,500 or something, but it's a really nice thing to put on your application. In order to do that, in order to qualify for that, you need to be in the top 2% of your state. California being the largest state, it's the toughest to get in. Generally, you need about somewhere in the mid 1400s on the PSAT scale to do that. But you can also get, even if you don't get the actual scholarship, you can also be a qualifier and so on, which shows that you actually had some nice numbers on that as well. Best time to start is early junior year, again, for the calendar we talked about, hit for December and then February. Toughest is late junior year because of the way the calendar is. You can also do, I get a lot of people who just, for whatever reason, haven't gotten the prep in junior year. Oh my God, am I too late starting senior year? Not really. As I say, seniors do better than juniors. You're more developed. I have a lot of students that I get senior year that do very well. And so there isn't necessarily, just because you haven't prepped in junior doesn't mean you can't do well senior year. And I'm going to talk a little bit about this, but while I'm here, might as well. So talking about early action, early decision, a lot of people think that, oh, well, my application has to be in, I don't know, November 1st, November 15th, whatever it is. So I can't really take the November or September or December SAT or ACT. That's not true, actually, unless you're going early action. So the September, October tests, if you're going early action, those are the last ones. September ACT, October SAT. Those are the last ones you can take. But if you're not going early decision or early action, you can take the November, even the December tests, and they will forward on your scores because they're not making decisions till after the first any year, end of the first year, end of the year anyway. So you can get those tests in, and they'll 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 look at those. So if you really still want to polish up your sort of portfolio of numbers, it's a really good time to do it. I just had a student, a senior, she took the November test. She went from a 1420, I think, to a 1520, and that really opens up her options there. So it really can help to do those late tests. People think they can't, they think seniors can't do it, but it really can help. And especially because, again, seniors do better than juniors. So it's a nice way to polish up your numbers then. Okay, let's talk briefly about test registration. Sign up early. This isn't as bad as it used to be. A couple of years ago, I had students driving out of state. They've for these tests because there just wasn't any room in any of the test centers. Now it's still pretty packed, especially for that March SAT that's coming up soon. So get in as early as you can. Book test dates well ahead to ensure your seat. And if it is booked up, but you really want to get in there, wait. This is especially true on the ACT, but the SAT as well. But a lot of times, the week or two before, you get a lot of people just canceling for different reasons on the test, and you can get in there, you can sneak in, but you got to keep looking to see whether or not there are any testing centers open. As I said, this isn't as extreme as it was, say, a couple of years ago. They've really done a better job of expanding testing opportunities. But for the most part, and especially in Marin, and I've said this every year since I've started this, Marin is underserved in terms of the number of testing centers and the slots that they have available. And so you really want to be careful. You really want to make sure that you can get in the right place, because you don't necessarily want to be driving down to the city if you can take it, say, locally. So for all those reasons, get in early on your test registration. Okay. Also, a little ACT tip. ACT will give you, used to call it the test information report, but now it's the ACT My Answer Key. And basically, they'll give you the test booklet and your answers. And this is really helpful, especially for someone like me, to see exactly what the student is missing, exactly what questions, whether they got in trouble on the time, late. You can really just have a nice map of the entire test, and you can drill down the exact questions that they miss. You can really polish up any weaknesses that you have. The My Answer Key is available October, April, and June tests. So if you're taking one of those, definitely order that booklet because it's really important. That's the ACT My Answer Key. Okay, one other thing when you're signing up, do not submit score reports during test registration. They always try and sell you, a few of you, great, I'm signed up for the March SAT. I'm going to submit to Harvard. Well, you don't know how you did yet. So you don't necessarily want to show them that number unless you're, after all the testing is done, you can decide which scores you're going to pick. Talk about that in a second. But in general, you don't submit any scores until you finally get all of your numbers in place and you know which scores you want to put in. Okay, so what do all these scores mean and how does it all translate? So basically, and if you read sort of across, this is generally sort of the levels we're talking about. So for instance, if you're at a 500 or what would be basically 1,000 for the SAT, that's sort of what they call minimal college readiness. This is to get into any school that wants tests. And you're around the 40th, maybe the ACT, maybe it's about a 19, maybe 50th percentile for that on a 20. Those are sort of minimal college readiness. The next step at 600 or about 25 is where the more selective schools start. So that's sort of the level where you want to get to if you're looking for a more selective school. That's where they start. Then that next level, 700, about a 30 on the ACT, that's where the very selective schools start. So if you're looking for a you know, I don't know, top 100 school maybe, then you really want to get on the SAT 700 per score, about a 1400 total, or over you want to crack 30 on the ACT. Scores reported online, you get them back in 2 through 3 weeks. If you want them by mail, I don't know who does mail anymore, 4 to 6 weeks. Okay, and finally, sending your scores. When you're sending your scores, we talked about don't send them before you get all your scores back. Most colleges will accept your best test sittings. It's what they give you what they call super score. And the way it works is this. Let's say the first time you took a test and you got let's say you got 600 on the verbal and a 700 in math. I'm just making these numbers up. And then the next time you take the test, you don't do quite as well on the math side, but you get a 700 on the verbal side. Well, you submit both tests, and they will take the best scores from both sittings. So instead of getting, say, within a 13 on either one of those tests, your super score, which is the one thing that they're going to look at for the most schools, is going to be a 1400. So another reason why you really want to take this thing twice, because you really, once you get numbers on the board that first time, then we're just ratcheting up the numbers. If you get a breakout number, say on one, like you take the first score and you get a breakout number, say on the verbal or the reading on the ACT or something like that, you've always got that score. So we're just ratcheting up different numbers to try and get your best score possible across the board. And ACT right now, SAT did that for a long time. ACT does it now. ACT right now, their whole score report is just based on your super score. So it really is sort of the way the colleges have all gone with this. There are a few colleges. I thought maybe I might even delete this because it's very few colleges now want all test settings or will accept only your best settings. Check with your individual schools, obviously, for anything, because they all have sort of little different policies here and there. I'm giving a general overview on this, but overall, the vast majority will superscore your tests. Okay, that's my little spiel. Anybody has any questions, please let me know.
Adam, we had a couple questions in the chat.
Yeah.
One person wants to know the difference between if the content for the PSAT is different than the content for the official SAT.
Yeah, it's a good question. Hang on, let me stop this sharing here. It's a good question. No, the short answer is no. The questions are pretty much the same difficulty. The thing about the PSAT though is that sometimes they'll throw in some experimental questions on that. They do a few experimental questions on the SAT sometimes, but the PSAT, they're using sort of the practice SAT is sort of, they're using the students a little bit as guinea pigs to test out new questions that they want to do. So sometimes you get on the PSAT, you get some questions that are like, I'll even say to a student, don't worry about that question. You're not likely to see on the test. It's sort of like, it does give you an idea of sort of things that they might be thinking about throwing in the future. But but usually they're just trying out different ways of asking a question. Long story short, they're pretty much the same. There is a difference though in the scaling of that though. The typical SAT is 1600. The PSAT is actually a 1520 scale. So if you get a 14 on your PSAT, you can kind of, if you want to extrapolate that out to an SAT, you can add a few points on that. So it actually, a 1400 on the PSAT is kind of like a 1420 or 1430 on the SAT, depending, because the scale is a little bit different. It's a little tighter scale on the PSAT.
There was one more question. I think you have addressed this, but just to make sure here.
Yeah.
One person wanted to know if it looked bad to take the test multiple times, and can you take it as many times as possible?
No and yes. So because you have the choice to submit your scores. So they have what's called, SAT calls it what's known as score choice. So you don't have to show them the test sittings you don't want to show them. On the ACT, it's a little different because like I said, they'll just submit your super score, and that's really what the schools are looking for. But if you're really concerned, like, well, I had a really bad ACT the first time I took it, you can always delete your scores on that. And that's the way you do it on the SAT and the ACT side. SAT is a little more user-friendly with that. ACT, it's basically just submitted delete, and I don't want this on my record at all, and they'll take it off. ACT may be coming up with a better system than that nowadays, but the short answer is no on that. And what was the second question?
I think you addressed it, but can you choose which scores you want to submit?
Yeah.
And you can take it as many times
And
as
oh yes, you can take it as many times as you want. And you know, I do have students, especially students who need extra time. I work with a lot of times I work with students who need extra time. And a lot of times it's just or students with severe test anxiety. They need to take it a few times to really get comfortable in that testing environment. And so you know, the more times you take it, the better you're going to do. And for every student's different. Vast majority of students, you take it 3 times, that's when you're optimizing your score the most. And that's why that calendar I laid out before is really effective. But, you know, I do have students who, you know, they just keep getting better. And so we keep going. Once, you know, you're done when you start topping out. I mean, at some point, your numbers, I'm not going to do any better than this. This is where I'm at. And if you're really looking to maximize your scores, you know, sometimes you do want to take it more than 3 times, but generally most students will take it twice and then third time in senior year if they want to.
I'm going to read another question. I just want to announce we are at noon. If the participants have the time to hang around
I'm
and do some
fine.
more questions, we can go a little late. But one more question on the chat is what level mathematics are in the PSAT, SAT, and ACT tests?
Yeah, it's a good question. So
Math courses.
yeah, the ACT in terms of content is a little more advanced than the SAT. The SAT is basically beginning algebra 2, or not beginning algebra 2. A lot of quadratics, a lot of parabola questions, a lot of advanced algebra stuff. The ACT has more pre-calc stuff in it, more trig, more geometry, advanced geometry. Um, so it's a little bit more advanced. And but like I said, like the questions are more straightforward. So if you just happen to know the topic, if you've had trigonometry, it's not usually that difficult. Whereas the SAT, while the content is more limited, the questions are more tricky. So again, it gets back to that whole sprint versus obstacle course. Generally, if a student's taking pre-calc, they should have no problem for the ACT, even for the or for the SAT. If a student is in algebra 2, if I got a junior now, like an algebra 2 or something like that, then probably the SAT is a better test because while there's a little bit of trig on the SAT, it's very easy to just clean up quickly.
Thank you, Adam. I think that's the only question on the chat board. Does anyone want to chime in with any more questions for either Michelle or Adam? And you can either go to the chat or just speak up. And while we're waiting for questions, I'll just tell you anecdotally, because my daughter's a senior and just went through this process. She took the SAT twice, once in San Francisco because we couldn't get in Marin County. It does book up pretty quickly. The second time at San Rafael High. She had a good experience with both settings. They each had kind of some pros and cons, but for the second test at San Rafael High, she just drove herself. The first exam in San Francisco was actually at the Hilton. It was not at a high school. And just to eliminate the stress of driving there in the morning, we checked in the night before and stayed the night. And they did give some perks to families. The whole Hilton was full of high school students and their parents, and they gave the students a meal voucher. And so it was a pretty stress-free environment. Whereas I know another family who drove to the Hilton in the morning and they barely got there before they shut the door and didn't let any more students in. So every testing center is going to have, a different environment, different situation. My daughter ended up applying to mostly UC and CSU schools who do not accept the test scores. It's not optional. They don't want them. They don't accept them. But because she had done so well, especially on the second test, her scores did improve. But she did so well on one section, the verbal section, they invited her to be a peer tutor. So although she didn't need her scores for the applications, in that case, she ended up getting an extracurricular, volunteer activity out of it that she used to boost her applications. So she did several hours of peer tutoring for the SATs. So it is a good idea to, even if you think you're not going to use the scores, you never know what opportunities it's going to open up. And again, it can boost your opportunities for financial aid and scholarships. We've got another chat here from someone's student. For college admissions, does an A plus versus an A minus matter because some teachers only give max A of a score A?
I'll go ahead and jump in. That sounds like up my alley. For private colleges and universities, they will look at the transcripts and they will look at the different grades and they will know sort of what your school's grading system actually is. So they will have they will read that transcript and look at all the different gradations between A pluses, A's, and A minuses. Schools also know that not all high school teachers will give A pluses, and so they will be aware of that fact. That is not necessarily something that you would expect, that an A plus is actually the highest grade in a class, right? They will know that by context. In terms of the UCs and the CSUs, when they actually go through and look at the grades and they will sort of recalculate students' GPAs based on their particular system, those pluses and minuses don't actually matter. They will even out to straight letter grades that then they will sort of put into that particular system. So just know that every college and university is a little bit different, but they will read those grades and transcripts within context.
Also, if your student is taking AP courses, those are going to weigh heavier. So even if they get a B minus instead of a B plus, it's going to count for more.
Absolutely. That's the rigor piece that I was talking about. So they do know that certain courses are honors level or IB or AP, and they take that into consideration when looking at the grades. And if you're at a school that doesn't offer APs, they will also know that as well, right? So they will sort of take all that into account as they're looking at transcripts.
Any further questions? I just wanted to thank everyone for participating and remind you that we will send out a recording as well as I think we can send the slides from the presentations. But I'll give everyone a few more seconds to chime in if you have any last questions or comments. In the chat, it says if your school doesn't offer AP, they still do look at whether or not you're taking AP tests. Is that correct?
I mean, they will. They will also know that like your school doesn't offer the coursework for an AP exam. And so if your student does choose to self-prepare for an AP exam, they will know that they've done that on their own, that that wasn't actually a part of their preparation. And I feel like there is one more question. How do colleges weigh courses taken outside your school at a community college or online? That you would submit those as a separate transcript when you actually apply to the school. And so say your student took a class at College of Marin, they would know that that's a college level course and they would sort of look at that accordingly.
And Michelle, one more follow-up. Is there a certain number of AP tests one should take?
It really depends on the student and it depends on what they're interested in. You obviously want to go ahead and go for rigor. So if your student is really strong in STEM, they may want to take several AP. They may want to take chem or they may want to take physics or they may want to take bio, like whatever is actually appropriate for them. If they're more humanities based, they may want to make sure that they're taking both of the English exams, Comp and Lit, and and Langen-Comp, and they may want to take a couple of the different history exams. So you want to kind of find that sweet spot where they're starting to take some APs junior year, seeing how that's going, planning on taking more APs senior year, sort of really focusing on the subjects that they're good at. You want to be careful, though, that you don't have a student taking all AP classes all senior year with all those AP exams. So students can get overwhelmed. So you want to find that sweet spot where they're challenged, where they're going to do well, where they're really developing themselves, but they're not going to get overwhelmed by taking too many.
Okay, well, last call for questions. I'll just take this opportunity to thank our presenters again, Adam and Michelle. I will send out follow-up information to everyone who registered, as well as the contact information, the websites for Marin SAT Prep and Samara Counseling. And thank you everyone who participated, and good luck.
Thank you, Rebecca. Really appreciate it.
All right.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. I'm going to end the recording now.